What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. Before we get started, our usual reminders. Please subscribe to us wherever you're consuming us. Spotify, Apple. If you're on YouTube, hit like on this video right now. Comment, help the algo love us back. And also subscribe. If you're a first-time viewer, please throw us the permanent subscription on YouTube and across the podcast platform. Rating and reviews on Apple can help us out a ton as well. We actually had, I did not tell Grant, we had our highest finish in the Apple podcast basketball charts of the year for the regular season, which must mean that we're getting deeper into off-season content where not as many podcasts are publishing content because we skyrocketed up the boards during the off-season last year. So that is fun. Follow us on the socials. Those are in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. And you can support the show by buying merch. I am wearing a Thermonuclear AF hoodie. So you can get those at the HardwoodKnocks merch store. The link to that is in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Finally, join our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast and YouTube description. I believe the link is working again. I cannot figure out Discord links for the life of me. They're always broken or something when I put them in there. I believe they're working. Now we get to the biggest question that everyone's dying to know after going a whole week without knowing. Grant, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a tough day. I guess this will serve as a segue into the first thing we're going to talk about. But Bob Myers stepped down today. So if you're a Warriors fan and you like continuity and the idea of civil conversations between your top executive and very important players with whom he's built a long relationship and can make asks of them that other executives can't, and so on and so forth. A little dicey, but like I told you, I the second I saw, I think it was yesterday, as we're recording this on Tuesday, that there was a press conference scheduled for Bob Myers. It was like, well, I started mentally and emotionally preparing myself for the likelihood that he was going to step down after over a decade, because you're not scheduling that press conference to say like, hey guys, hooray, I'm back, surprise, I took a below market deal because I love it here so much. Like, he just had too many. Well, I'd be curious what you think. Personally, I think he just has so many opportunities to do things that are like bigger, probably. I think he'll be one of the most sought after like executives for anything, not just like a sports or a league. You know, he might run a league someday or something like that. But
hopefully not he's in league.
he's in such a sweet position. So it makes sense. And just the timing of where the Warriors are and the financial decisions they have to make. It seems like the right decision for him, probably, because it's not like he's going to be hurting for work the second he wants to go do something else, right? Do you have any thoughts on it?
No, this didn't faze me at all. I'm with you to where I like kind of was preparing for it, but I guess I didn't read into as much of the press conference as you did. Perhaps I'm a sucker for framing because they're like, this is his traditional end of year press conference, but it's like it did come a little bit later than it normally did, and it feels like that's kind of telltale. What's interesting is that the reporting behind this initially, like, do you remember? I think it was Shams came out with a report that they were lowballing him, and now Woj came out and said they offered him ownership stakes. He was going to be one of the top paid executives in the league. And it did always kind of feel, despite that reporting from Shams, I thought it was wild if they were actually lowballing him. But then again, do you remember Joe Lacob, Marcus Thompson published the piece that he didn't want to max Steph Curry way back when?
I remember they didn't want to offer him like an option, or so they tried to do it they tried to max him without a player option. And he was like, no, I'm going to get that option. That's what I remember.
That's clown.
Right.
But you always got the sense, because it was like, okay, well, they've kept making him offers. They can't all be bad. This was less about the money and more about, oh, does he actually feel like he's done, or is he wanting to move on to the next thing? Does he kind of sense like, this team's fucked, man. Look at this new collective bargaining agreement and the limitations it's going to place on team building. Maybe this isn't, the NBA in general. Maybe this isn't a job that he has the same passion or appetite for. It's kind of, I'm very interested. He has a press conference, like you mentioned, I think it's today at 4 p.m. So it'll be Eastern time, 1 p.m. Pacific. So we'll be done recording by then. I'm very interested to see what he has to say. But this is like, moving aside from that, like, you're not shocked by it. And this is, to you, would you agree that this is very much not okay, they didn't offer him enough money. It's more of like about Bob Myers? Or do you think it could actually be about the direction or limitations or that are placed upon the Warriors right now, or even more so, well, this is like kind of the end of them, and he doesn't want to be responsible for having to build it back up.
Yeah, I think those are all factors kind of like weighing into it. But like the money thing is interesting because it's hard to know which way the reporting, at least, or the impact of that stuff cuts, because presumably it's from Myers' camp that that's being leaked, that he's not being offered, you'll be the highest paid executive, full stop. I assume that's where that comes from. But are you leaking that to drive up offers because you want to stay? Or are you leaking that so that when you leave and you've already made your mind up to leave, it doesn't look like you're just jumping ship? It's like, well, he was not being offered fair compensation for his position. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know which way the leak of the money stuff cuts. That said, it's hard to imagine that there was a dollar figure. This is just it's total speculation, but it seems like there may not have been a dollar figure like within reason that would have kept him. And I think it's just because he has so many options. Maybe I'm overstating like how broad that suite of possibilities is, but like if he wanted to run another team, certainly he's at the top of the list, right? Like there's not another executive that you would hire over the top of him if you're an NBA team. Like, I imagine, I think the Wizards did make inquiries or something like that. Like he would have been picked ahead of Winger, I assume. But yeah, I just think it's hard for me to imagine that we'd like to make you the third highest paid executive in the league. And he said it's first or I'm walking. Like that doesn't seem like at least the main factor. I think if anything, this is kind of someone seeing the situation clearly and like leaving the party an hour early rather than an hour late, like Myers saying this was as good as it's going to get for 10 years. Like that's just insane luck. So much went right and it won't be better than it was. So I might as well get out now and, try to find the next great thing, as opposed to like kind of ride this, last couple of years out.
And there's like, to call it Sam Hinkie-esque would be wildly inaccurate because Sam Hinkie was forced out basically, but
yeah,
he already switched gears from being an agent, from the agent side, to then being an executive. You mentioned the next thing just might not be running like an NBA team. It could just be something else entirely. And the fact that we know the Wizards made inquiries, you're absolutely correct there. I don't know if that's like the team that could have poached him just based off there, but like you have to think they were offering like good stuff because Michael Winger left. I mentioned this on the podcast I recorded. So like he left a pretty comfy gig with the Clippers. So I know that team has missed expectations because of injuries. So this very much just felt like not a, like, it didn't feel like a money thing to me. It just felt very much like it wasn't even just he's trying to move on from the Warriors to another team. The way you framed it, I think, was just perfect. The next thing where it's like, well, maybe the next thing is not running a basketball team.
And I think I agree. So I'm going to say seemingly contradictory things. Like, I don't think it was about the money, except I do remember seeing, I forget who it was. It might've been Woj. It might've been Shams. It might've been like Marcus Thompson, but talking about like, he might have opportunities to get into like private equity and just like manage teams like that have nothing to do with sports. And like once the words private equity get involved as like a job option, like that's a level of money that you're not going to get if you're the highest paid, team president in the NBA by like a factor of 10. Like the potential to just make like generational, like, fundamentally life altering money outside of basketball, I think probably exists for him. So it wasn't about the money in one sense, but it might also just be about the money, that there's so much out there that he couldn't say no, tied into all the other stuff we said about the team. And like, you might want to jump now before it gets ugly.
And outside of Bob Myers, there's the actual Warriors aspect of this. They're not, I think that this is a real loss, but they still have Steph Curry. And that is, and always has been, just the driving force of everything that happens at Golden State. And so long as you have him, in theory, you're going to be relevant. You're going to be really good. But this is a real challenge, whether Myers was going to be in charge or it's someone else. And so my two questions to you is, one, how big of a loss is this actually? But two, like, what are we looking at in terms of options to replace him? They're probably not. My expectation is that it's just going to go to like Kirk Lacob or something, that they're not going to go outside the organization to fill this post.
Yeah, I think it's a significant loss. Because of how it impacts like literally every other aspect of your off season and just how your operation runs. Because like the relationships with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green and Steve Kerr and basically everybody up and down the organization, like now they're different. And I think, like, Myers did have a spotty draft record. They have had struggles developing players, but like the one thing you never heard was that he was like anything but basically a savant at like interpersonal, relationships and just being honest and being, just good at dealing with like really thorny emotional issues. Like managing Draymond Green for 10 plus years, like there are not a lot of executives. I can't imagine that would have had the level of success Myers did. And so that's just a way to illustrate, like, it's going to matter that having some other voice there, however capable it ends up being, will change the way the Warriors operate. And I think it does at a root level, make it easier to imagine some of the other relationships ending or changing or being harder to maintain. So whether that's, well, now do the negotiations with Draymond Green on the next deal get trickier because you don't have like a decade plus of personal equity built up with the person you're negotiating with? Or what's Klay Thompson's next deal look like? Will there be the same sense of like, we came in together, let's go out together, if it's Mike Dunleavy and Kirk Lacob running, personnel, which seems like very likely that's what it'll be. It'll be a promotion from within. One of those two guys those two will be making the decisions, whatever the titles are. So yeah, it is a significant loss, which like you don't always say about a top executive. I feel like we think of ownership and coaching as sort of more impactful, but the guy kind of in between those two layers is, at least in the Warriors case, was like he was the guy. He was sort of the guy, like decision making wise and sort of tone setting wise in terms of just how the team operates. I think that will change a lot without him there.
And I think it's very rare where you have Steph, Draymond, and Klay Thompson all coming out and saying, hey, we want Bob Myers to stay. You don't see players commenting on the lead basketball executive. Like you see it about the coach sometimes, but you don't see them come out and be like, yeah, like we really want our general manager or executive vice president or team president to stay. That's not something that ever. And so this is such a unique situation. And I think the final element of all this, and we've kind of stepped around it, is I don't really know. Like you mentioned the Draymond Green negotiations. I'm not sure what else though Bob Myers could have materially changed about this team. Not to say he was dispensable, but this summer they're not going to have their mid-level exception unless they go on a generational salary cutting spree. Because the new CBA changes, and then more of them being phased in next summer, where it's making trades not impossible for teams in their situation, but a lot harder because of the aggregation rules and the rules about whether they're actually able to trim salary as part of those trades. I don't like whoever takes over this job, like the Warriors, they're going to have a difficult time regardless, but I also place a premium on what they do this offseason because it's sort of last year was their last like shred of real flexibility because you were able to give Dante DiVincenzo part of the mini mid-level. You can't do something like that this year. But this offseason, it's sort of like if you need to make a trade or like move one of your bigger contracts, like a Jordan Poole, or if you're looking to take a bigger swing, consolidate with your picks and salaries, this is probably the summer now for them to do it. And you don't have your lead basketball executive, like you said, of the past decade to helm this. And so it's just, I don't know. They're not doomed because Steph Curry exists. And I think even as constructed, they're dangerous. I don't think they're title favorite material, but they're dangerous. It's just, this isn't a cushy gig to come into whether you've been with the organization already, or if you're someone from the outside, it's not something easy to just come in and undertake.
And, this is total, again, I'm getting way too speculative, but there may be some element of, there's a real feeling that like we're towards the end of this dynasty, obviously, like it may be over, but, and maybe it's as simple as Myers didn't want to be the guy that had to tear it down. And it's way easier for someone that doesn't have all the emotional investment and like personal ties to come in and like start tearing band-aids off like that. That is a real aspect of this where it's just, if you're not tied to this thing, it's easier to like rip it up. Which maybe ownership like communicated like, hey, that's the way we're going to go. At least maybe not immediately, but like the numbers are we cannot keep this team together and function basically because it's too expensive. We have to make fundamental changes. And I would not begrudge Myers for not wanting to have to be the guy that was saddled with that job. That would suck. It'd be like breaking up a family that you like put together. It'd be difficult.
That would be funny if that's the real reason. He just doesn't want to have to be the one to make the final call on the end.
I can identify with that a little bit. Like, don't you think? Like, I can imagine being like, no, somebody else can do this. That's too painful. I don't want to deal with that. I'll go.
Especially if your alternative. Especially if your alternative is, I'm just going to veer into private equity. Then right. There you go. Right. Nice little golden parachute. There is an NBA Finals matchup to talk about. I don't know if you heard that. I don't even know whether do we start with like the downfall of the Celtics because they're done. We should probably just start with the Nuggets and the Heat, right? Like this is. Where do you want to start?
I kind of want to, before we get to the finals, I kind of want to talk Heat Celtics, however you'd like to do that. Let's start with the Celtics because we'll get to the Heat, in the context of their matchup with the Nuggets. Was this not like one of the weirdest performances throughout a series by a team that you can, I'm going to remember the Eastern Conference Finals for a long time because of the completely like bonkers narrative shifts that happened just throughout it. And like, I constantly found myself in game 6 and less so in game 7, because that result got decided fairly decided much earlier. But thinking of like, all right, so it's game 6. The Celtics they're done. Like, oh, they came all the way back. The Heat did it again. And then you get the tip in from White. And just the roller coaster of the fallout, especially when you think of where were we after 3-0 and now here we are at 3-3. And then game 7 is almost like, I don't know what to talk about for game 7, but I can't remember a series where like Mazzulla was gone right after game 3. Like that was the constant talk of like, we talked about it. Like he has to be gone. We can't change the whole roster. And then I don't know what to make of them evening the series. And then I don't know what to make of them ultimately losing the series. It's been a weird series. So I guess we should talk about, unless you have more general thoughts and confusion like I do, but we probably should talk about like what Boston needs to do if we concede that like firing Mazzulla is not the definite button you're going to push. Like what's the way forward? What do you do with Jaylen Brown? Do you want Grant Williams back in restricted free agency? Take it whichever way you want. Like, is Tatum a 1A or a 1B? We have to relitigate that for the 27th time. I just don't know. I don't know which direction to go in the forward-looking sort of piece of this.
I think the question Mazzulla was posed after game 7 was, is this team too reliant on the 3 ball? And I get it because everything you kind of mapped out about the series being bonkers and the ebbs and flows of it, the peaks and valleys, that's been kind of the Boston Celtics in a nutshell. It's just that when you average it out over the course of the regular season, they're elite. They're going to be one of the top 2 teams in the Eastern Conference, one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the league. But that when you go through these smaller pockets of time where you're facing an opponent who has more time to game plan for you, those peaks and valleys can be more harmful, I think, as we saw just here. But I also keep coming back to, so like, are you going to deviate from or say it got us to game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals a year after we made it to the NBA Finals? Are you going to say that this core is the problem? Are you even going to say that this coach is the problem? Are we going to say that they actually have major issues? They came within 2 wins of a championship last year. And so I think it's important to acknowledge their flaws. I just can't get on we need to like have this major shakeup here. And Mazzulla, we could say what we want about that. They signed him to a 4-year extension or whatever it was. I imagine he's not too expensive. You could change the coach, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
Who are you going to get at this point? When you look, I mean, Nick Nurse off the board, and he's viewed as one of the best tacticians. Adrian Griffin in Milwaukee, we'll get to those. Ty Lue's not currently available as far as we know. Could you poach? Like, could you get Monty Williams on board? Is there another, we've seen the Celtics be unafraid both under Danny Ainge and now with Brad Stevens to go with first-time head coaches in the past? Are they someone who's like, oh, Chris Quinn is someone who's all about us? I don't know that change even does anything. I will say it does feel, and I know a lot of this can be like Miami got hot on offense, but like Boston's inability to bust up the zone defense of Miami feels like the bigger issue here, especially when you're looking at game 7. And I do think you need to credit what Miami does. But like for so much of that game, the Celtics were running the paint is lava offense, where it's like it didn't even seem like they were attempting to get in there. Part of that might have been Jason Tatum. He had that like leg injury. He was visibly just not moving as well as he normally would. And I think, look, I'm not going to relitigate Tatum being the 1A because I just think he is. Like, is he the 1A on the same level as peak LeBron? No. And the biggest quibble is like his playmaking. But I think there's more of a variance in a good way because the Celtics there's too much variance in the way that they play on offense. I think you could argue. Like, he can slice and slash and get to the basket. And I feel like does a better job of reading those situations because when they kind of needed to do that, when RW3 wasn't on the floor, which was a lot this series, like that was someone they could count to get there. And like those drives are not like Jaylen Brown drives to nowhere where he's going to dribble the ball off his foot and you need to worry about his handles. And so I think if you're looking to take away something macro from the way that the Celtics are built or what they need to do, I guess there's like 3 layers. Is there any concern about the front court just because RW3 was limited at points in this series? They can only play like 13, 14 minutes in game 7. Al Horford's getting older. You mentioned Grant Williams is going into restricted free agency, and he kind of became like breaking case of emergency almost for much of these playoffs. 2, do you actually need more of an offensive organizer to where I think people are going to be like, well, they should go after Dame. But it's like, I don't know if it's a Dame so much as if they were able to get a Mike Conley. And how do you do that? Again, they have some draft equity to trade, but like if you're acquiring a substantial player, it's going to cost you one of your top 7 guys. And then that leads me to the question of, you're going to answer this twice, is Jaylen Brown worth the 5-year, $295 million extension? And if he's willing to sign it, are you offering it? Or do you actually look at moving him? Again, he was the second best player this season on a team that made the game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals and of a team that made it to the NBA Finals last year. But I am curious if you're like, is either has your perception of Jaylen Brown changed at all, or this team ceiling with him, or is your perception about the Celtics, if it's not Jaylen Brown, what's the biggest thing about your perception of the Celtics this series changed for you?
I don't know how much changed. So I think probably I should start by saying I have never been as high on Brown as most, I think. Which is, I think I picked him as an all-star, but I don't necessarily think I would have put him on an all NBA team. Because of like some of the limitations you talked about are very much like representative of the Celtics offensive limitations. Like, you mentioned the paint is lava stuff. Like, I couldn't get past the thought several times during the series of the Celtics just don't like they actually pass the ball a lot, but there aren't a lot of incisive passes, and there isn't a lot of I'm driving to kick, which the Heat did by contrast exceptionally well. They constantly get into the lane, kick it back out, drive, kick, rinse, repeat. The Celtics kind of just swing it around. And Brown, I think, is one of the guys that's limited as a passer. And like you said, it's kind of an adventure sometimes when he starts to dribble. And that is just broadly a problem with the Celtics, which we knew because we've seen it's such a familiar sight when things go bad offensively for Boston. The threes aren't falling. They aren't getting into the lane and generating a lot of good threes, the kick out passes and things like that. And they're not against a zone in particular where it really, the Heat play zone more often and better than basically everybody. But it shouldn't be that difficult with enough looks at a zone to find the weak spots and, whether you're cutting or passing, just sort of exploit some of the things you're giving up with a zone. And the Celtics just weren't good enough at that. And so it's a passing thing. It's a offensive feel thing. So to get to the other thing you're asking, I don't know if it is the big guys that I would tinker with. Because I feel pretty good about if you bring Williams back, you match something at a norm, reasonable number, and you have him, you have Horford again, and you have Robert Williams as your 4-5, combo. I'm fine with that. What I think is weird because they have so many guards and wings is you just need ones that can penetrate and pass and like get the offense running, because it's been a couple years in a row now where we've seen like it just stalls out, and it's high variance because they want to shoot a lot of threes, but it's the quality of the threes that they get sometimes is really wanting because they don't, bend the defense enough with the drive or the pass or some combination of both. So finally, like 600-ish million for Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum is the number out there that is like really gives you some pause if you're talking about extending both for the max. Brown obviously first. I think I'm paying Brown the max, even though I'm not as high on him as most, because I'm not as, if you stop and think about the 600 million for both of them, it's like, yeah, that's a lot, scary. But for your two best players, and when your two best players have gotten you to the finals or close to it multiple years in a row, I think that's when you pay the max to two guys. And so I wouldn't be comfortable with it, but I think you just sort of have to. And then you hope
Right.
that you can improve on the Brogdon spot. You can get someone that's more consistent than Smart. You can, I don't know, find one more wing that maybe can move the ball. I'm going to throw this to you. This is normally not how it works, but I was thinking, okay, if you're not going to extend Jaylen Brown as I'm watching Game 7, and you want to move him, like, what could that get you? And like, I think the Bradley Beal contract is horrible, but I was imagining Bradley Beal in Jaylen Brown's spot, and I could just see him like creating more shots and being able to dribble and do a little more on the ball. And like, I didn't hate it. Like, so there are trade options if you wanted to explore moving Brown
Who's
instead.
giving up? That's not. Does Washington need to give up more? And that's because of the Beal contract. We assume Beal would waive his no trade clause.
Well, I mean, if you're gonna pay Brown pretty close to what Beal's making, I'm not sure. I think Beal is less reliable health wise, and is older, but like, I don't know,
The,
man. That the
the
things Beal does well are very different than the things Brown does well, and
the
it
issue
might matter.
the issue here is though. So what else? You have to send out more money to
Yeah,
get Beal, and so it's just like, well, then who are you? I guess Gallo's contract. Once he picks up his player option, you could use that. So you could step ladder your way there.
yeah.
That's interesting. Would you do Bradley Beal? So if it was just Bradley Beal for Jaylen Brown straight up, you would do it.
I
Like
think
if that's the framework.
watching Game 7 last night, I couldn't stop thinking about like, what if there was another guard / wing that could come up and like break his guy down and create like a 15-footer or draw two and move the ball at the right time. Like, I think Beal might make more sense. I think defensively you lose a lot, but defensively the Celtics are going to be fine because they have a bunch of good bigs and good defenders elsewhere. I just think he might help more on offense. It might unclog the works a little bit.
So Jason Maples put this one on Twitter during Game 7 or after Game 7. Portland gets Jaylen Brown. Boston gets Anthony Simons, number 3, and Shaden Sharp. Who says no?
I mean, I'm doing that if I'm Boston, I think, just because I like all those assets.
I think Portland says no, and you probably need to remove one of the. You need Simons like to make the salaries work, so you need to remove one of number 3 or Shaden Sharp. But I will preface it with, I don't even know if that's exactly what Boston needs.
That's too much youth. Yeah, I agree
There's
with that.
Simons, but it's like he's not going to break down and maybe get them. I mean, maybe he would get to the basket in the Celtics offense even more than he does. And we know he can create shots off the dribble from the perimeter. Is he the level of passer that you want? He's probably a better ball mover than Jaylen Brown at this point and ball handler. So maybe I'm talking myself into it. But if it's one of those things, if it's Anthony Simons and Shaden Sharp or number 3, are you still doing it then if you're Boston?
I mean, I don't know if that's quite enough, especially like the number 3 is if you're going to flip it, because I don't think Boston should necessarily be in the business of like the 2 timeline kind of thought process to tie it back to Bob Myers. I think you need to try to win like now-ish. Yeah, I don't know. I think it is interesting that the Celtics are like the one team we would say like, oh, they don't need OG Anunoby. we can cross him off. We don't need him because he would be like another guy in their offense that just like, well, if he dribbles, good luck, and if he tries to pass it, good luck again. That's not the type they need. But yeah, they gotta get someone. You said it right at the start. They gotta get someone that's gonna break the defense down, or like at least make the offense look like it's more than just swinging it around from one wing to the top to the other wing and hoping something happens.
Which leads me to my next little quick exercise. Who would you rather have for the next 5 years?
Okay.
Jaylen Brown or Mikal Bridges?
At what we presume will be
just the
max
next
for Brown?
No, the next 5 years. Just throw the money off the table.
I think it's a little, well, you know what? I might rather have Bridges just because of the scalability. Like I think he offensively can sort of fit everywhere better than Brown does. But I don't know. That's a really tough call because Brown is just, he's been, probably better. And they're not that far apart in age. So yeah, I don't know. I'd go Bridges maybe, but I just like the plug and play part.
I think I'd probably still lean Brown, and I'm wondering if we're becoming victims of the moment, where it's like we watched him have this 8, 9 turnovers, whatever it was in Game 7, and we're just so down on him. And is he incapable of improving? And maybe he is. I do think, and you mentioned this, and I didn't allow you to factor it in. The looming specter of the contract commitment is what I think is sending people into thinking that this is what they need to do. Where I land on the Celtics, though, is I'm futzing and fiddling on the margins insofar as I can. They're a team that's going to have some second apron concerns, but they might be able to keep their mid level this year. And I'm just hoping that, look, that's not going to get everything you need. You're not just going to get like a slashing ball handling guard. At least I don't think, for that type of money. But can you futz and fiddle on the margins there? Or if you need to, can there be a scenario where it's like, right, are we moving Malcolm Brogdon's salary and draft equity and seeing what we could parlay that into if we need to make a, let's call it a big-ish, not big-ish, in case anyone heard me mispronounce it, big-ish type of move.
I wonder too if, like, we're very focused on personnel, and not to cape for Missoula but I also I wonder if just like it's beyond noticeable. It starkly stands out, the contrast between what the Heat were doing just systemically on offense and what the Celtics were doing in this series, and how much more body and ball movement and like effective ball movement the Heat were able to generate with like an offense, by the way, that sucked all year. So, I mean, again, obviously we're just bracketing the Heat's playoff performance when we talk about them. I wonder if there's a way for Missoula or whoever else it ends up being, probably Missoula, I think he may have saved his job, to just kind of,
would you be, I'm sorry to interrupt, do you like, I don't think either of us might have even predicted it had they gotten swept, although maybe we would have, but like Missoula's not getting canned, is he?
I don't think so now. I think he'll be there, but, and so if he is, then like everybody harps on the timeout thing. Like, I don't care. Who cares about when the coach?
I did find the jokes where it's like he saves his timeouts to bring home to his family.
They're funny. Yeah, they're good, but like that can't be your first criticism of a coach. I wonder if they could just get more bodies moving. Like maybe they just don't have the passers to capitalize on that, and that's the problem. They've thought of that, they tried it, they can't do it. But just like moving around and driving to pass a little more, I think could really help.
Yeah. So I'm with you there. There is, as we're recording this, Shams is reporting that there was a Celtics play. He's teasing it on one of those sports shows. Maybe I need to start teasing. I try to do that with our thumbnails, where like tease like the spiciest thing, but he's teasing it saying more on a Celtics player that was dealing with a previous undisclosed injury. I would love to know, one, so we knew Malcolm Brogdon was playing through injury. We saw Jason Tatum get injured. Maybe he was injured before that. And we knew Jaylen Brown, by the way, wasn't an elbow injury or something that he was kind of playing through. And we knew that at the start of the series.
Yeah.
I want to make this clear. I don't want to say I don't care, but like the Miami Heat did not have Tyler Hero or Victor Oladipo, and they were missing Gabe Vincent for a game. He became super important. You're banged up this time of year. That's just a matter of fact. And so I'm curious to see, it'll come out, and maybe it'll come out during this podcast, but that's something to consider as well. I think a lot of people are going to veer towards let's blow up the Celtics because they've been together for so long, even though they're on the younger side with their two best players. And I will say, I think it's okay to have that conversation. I'm not going to poo-poo anyone who's having it. That being said, I just wouldn't do it. Like, it's just too nuclear for me when you're already this good. And I don't know what the move is. Like, who else are you trading? And I would argue this is not the time to move Jaylen Brown because of the perception from Game 7 and this series. And two, you can't max him and then trade him for a year. And so his other team has to worry about his free agency where, he'll be a lot cheaper to his next team than if he signed a supermax or close to it with the Celtics. But you also have to know that he's coming back. Should you be giving up all this stuff to get him?
Yeah, I think just broadly, the Celtics aren't really stuck yet in the way that would force a team to really be drastic in what they do because they don't really have a bad contract. Like you could argue that if Brown signs that full max, maybe that's it. I'm not even sure that's like that. You're not looking like a Ben Simmons or Tobias Harris or, Blake Griffin's old one was always the one we would cite. They're not there yet. And with the exception of Horford, everyone that matters on this team has the realistic potential to just be better next year. Like that, even someone like Smart, like that's, if he became a 39% 3-point shooter, it's just like we're not at the point where the expiration date is even like on the horizon, unless it's just there's interpersonal stuff and this has run its course, which I don't feel like we've gotten to yet. So yeah, I agree. Yeah, who knows? Maybe Shams will say the reason that there's an undisclosed Celtics injury is because somebody punched somebody. Like, I don't know. That seems unlikely though. Yeah, I don't blow it up either.
Who's most likely to pull the Draymond Green in Boston? Is it Smart?
Smart's involved. I don't know which side of it he's on.
Involved. Was he the punchy or the puncher?
Yeah, one of the two. I don't know which way I'd lean on that one.
Good segue from Rob Sheldon. Hello from the Philippines. Great show with Miroslav the other day, Dan. Good stuff. I went on DNVR, Serbia corner. That was fun. You're sounding more like a Nuggets fan every day. I am not a Nuggets fan, but I do root for my own agenda because I'm selfish as hell. And so that's a good segue into these NBA finals, which, I mean, I don't think either team was been considered a ridiculous finals participant at the beginning of the season. If you knew how good the Nuggets were, picking them to make the finals, maybe not even winning it, like was reasonable. And then the Heat just came off their conference finals appearance and they had finished first in the East last year. So they had that mystique swirling. Mm-hmm. I would argue, I saw Izzy Gutierrez from ESPN did pick Nuggets versus Heat in the finals preseason. That's a hell of a pick from him. This is just one of the more unexpected finals matchups. I think just in large part because of what the Miami Heat have done. I'm not shocked by the Nuggets at all. And I don't think you are. We had that like 4 to 6 weeks to close the season. You and I, or at least I was actually concerned. And it turns out like, they were just screwing around. And like, that's, if you have that flip the switch, go ahead and do it. That's totally fine. But the things Michael Malone was saying, maybe he's just a serial like hyperbolizer. I don't know, but the Heat being here, we need to start with the Heat because I think it's so much focus for us is going to be paid to the Nuggets as we get to our predictions. I'll frame it this way. Any Miami Heat fan that wants to talk their shit and rebuke anything we say by just being like, well, no, Heat culture, or like, look at we got here. Like I'm totally okay now with just you people using like these ineffable descriptions or logic. Right. Like to describe the Heat, where it's, we can get into look at what their zone defense was able to do against Boston. Caleb Martin probably should have won the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, but I will say, I think people underestimate how much of like the conference finals MVP is about the entire playoffs rather than just that series, even though it's not framed that way. But the fact that Caleb Martin got 4 of the 9 votes, so 44+% of the votes, wild. Oh, it's a Haywood Highsmith game. He plays in Game 5, not Game 6, just comes in Game 7, has that sequence where I think he pickpocketed, was it Tatum?
Yep.
And so it's just like, what, and then finishes. Gabe Vincent, like being super important. And then you have these guys, Duncan Robinson, and I'm repeating myself on this point. He just barely in the rotation this year, certainly not as consistently in years past. Now he's this integral part of the playoff rotation. And he's dribbling. I have never seen this dude dribble so much in his entire career. I think he might have set the record in the playoffs for like the number of times he's put the ball on the floor in the playoffs has to be more than the combined time he did that throughout his entire career, playoffs and regular season before now. And so I want your thoughts on the Heat, but I will make it clear there's going to be a bunch of level-headed analysis on why the Heat can't beat the Nuggets. And if Heat fans want to dismiss it and just say, well, just look at what we did, I'll just be like, you know what? Like, you're right. Like, you're just right.
They've been the hardest team to evaluate all throughout the playoffs. And they've made it equally hard to evaluate the teams that they've beaten because like, we've belabored this again. We're at the point in the season where we will just have to repeat ourselves. But, this was a team with a negative point differential. This was a team that lost the first play-in game. This was a team that was down 3 with like 3 minutes left in the second play-in game. And then shots start to fall. Playoff Jimmy shows up. Everybody that has a Heat jersey just gets 25% better, at a minimum. And like, here we are. Now, there are level-headed ways to praise them before we get to the level-headed ways that we both probably think it won't be enough to beat the Nuggets. But like, just take the Duncan Robinson thing as an example. I don't think it's an accident. He didn't just discover, up faking a guy that's closing out like his hair's on fire and dribbling a little bit and looking for the pass. Like that's got to be him realizing this is a way. Boy, I'm getting a lot of contested shots up. Like, oh, I wonder if I just up faked and dribbled, if there's more there. And I'm sure in film sessions and their coaching staff is just like, yeah, this is like a weapon we have. Let's do that. I really do think there's nothing you could tell me in terms of the things that the Heat uncover within a series because their coaching staff is so good and their scouting and player development and everything that seems too far-fetched. And it's just like, as something as conspicuous as the zone, which was highly effective, down to something like Robinson with just saying, don't shoot it right away unless you're open, maybe dribble a little bit and the defense will just fall to pieces because they're not ready for it. I think all that stuff, you can be level-headed and you can just sort of, drink the Kool-Aid and get to the same spot, which is just that the Heat have been, by us at least, sort of undersold and underappreciated, and they're just really good and really dangerous. And every series they've been in, I think we've picked the other team, with the exception maybe of the Knicks. I can't remember where we went on that one.
I picked the Knicks. I went through Homer. I picked the Cavs to beat the Knicks, but I picked the Knicks.
Sure, so did I.
We did. I picked them to lose every series. I had Bucks, Knicks, and then I did have Celtics. So yeah.
Yeah. So I just, at this point, you have to just make the accounting for the fact that the Heat do not conform to expectations. Like whatever evaluations we're going to make in the next few minutes, you have to price in. The Heat have just figured out how to beat 3 teams in a row with, injuries happening to them too, like as much as other teams want to complain about that. So I don't know how you can, anyone that says the Heat have no chance, and there will be, I'm building straw man right now, but that's the wrong take. The idea that the Heat are drawing dead is a wrong take. I can't get there.
The Miroslav Shook gave me a heart attack. It's not Highsmith, it's Hightower. It is Highsmith. I checked. I thought I got it wrong for some reason. I was like, so what is your biggest, looking at the actual series and stuff that we can quantify here or discuss, what's your biggest overarching thought leading into these finals?
I'm curious if the Heat's 3-point shooting can hold up, because they shot like 43% against Boston, and they have done that across some series now, and they shot it way better in the last like 15, 20 games of the year. But that's just the make or break thing for them, because I think it'll be harder to defend Denver than it was to defend Boston. But I think the Heat are capable. I think they've shown that they're willing to try enough different things to make it difficult on a ridiculously good offense that maybe Jokic is just defense proof. I don't know. But if they're not going to hit, a huge, a seemingly unsustainably high percentage of their threes, like 43%, which they just did, then it's going to be really tough. I don't know that they have enough defense there. And so the other side of that is, how effective will, say, the zone be? Will they even try it? Like what do the defensive matchups look like? Because Boston and Denver are just so fundamentally different with the way they run their offenses that this is almost just like a starting from scratch situation for Miami.
This is, and so it's interesting that the Miami's defense specifically. Oh shit! As I dropped my phone on one of my phones on the floor, Caitlin Cooper had tweeted out that the Nuggets averaged 1.169 points per possession against zone defense their regular season. That was the best mark in the NBA. And she also tweeted that they saw a zone on 2.6% of their possessions, which was 24th, because teams have zero incentive to go zone against Jokic because of the way that he can carve you up.
Yep.
And I'm so interested to see like how the Heat are going to defend Denver, because Bam Adebayo is not going to do anything to just make maybe he'll make Jokic's life difficult, but just he's not going to do anything to phase him. And Jokic is so good at breaking everything down, whether he's like it's with his passing or being able to put the ball on the floor and work from the outside in now. Like, yeah, he could work from the block as well. And we do have Rob Shelton in the chat saying Matt Moore broke down Bam matched up on Jokic 42 minutes. Jokic scored 50 points, had 25 assists. I think that's fair to point out. I'm not throwing everything out we've ever seen from the Heat in the regular season, but this is just like, I need to see what it looks like in the playoffs. I'm more fascinated to see, because I do think, as good as Denver's defense has been, and I think they've not been great defensively, they've been incredibly steady defensively.
Good enough. Yeah.
Yeah. And to have Michael Porter Jr. defending the way that he has and hitting the glass the way that he has. And then also Jamal Murray, I think, had a pretty good defensive series in the conference finals. He did some of the better work against Austin Reeves that I had seen among Nuggets players. So it almost feels like Denver is better suited. That's not a hot take, but like you're going to trust Denver's defense more in this series than Miami's, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And that's also by saying like the Nuggets aren't a, hey, let's go mismatch hunting. And so like my type of team. And so Miami might feel more confident in being, well, can we get more time with Duncan Robinson on the floor in this series to increase the chances that our 3-point shooting is going to hold or exceed expectations. I don't see, and this feels so stupid to say because you have Caleb Martin, Butler, and Bam. And so you get into the individual matchups and it's like, okay, well, Bam is going to have to see a majority of the time on Jokic. Maybe they could do, they could try, like they can't do what the Lakers did. I don't know that they're built to do that, where it's, we're going to put LeBron on Jokic and try and have, or someone else, and then try and have Bam sort of roam around. I don't know, like what would you even to pull that string? Is it Butler? Because you're going to need Butler to defend. Like Butler and Caleb Martin are going to be mission critical to defending like Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray. Like those are two assignments that they're going to track. And you start to get into those matchups and it's just, why do I feel better about Denver being able to defend? It's not just, there's the Jokic factor. So none of trusting Denver's offense isn't this high level take. It's even going like from there, like trickling down. Denver seems better suited to defend Miami than the other way around.
I don't know. That's tough. I think it's going to be a lot harder for Miami to play the kinds of defense that it wants to and that have been most effective, which is the zone first and foremost, but also against Boston and against most other teams, considering the weird, smallish, but sort of like-sized lineups that the Heat can play and Adebayo's ability to guard 5 positions, switching is totally fine. You can switch with all, against Boston, the Heat are happy to switch. That if that means you have Adebayo switching from Horford to Brown, like great. That's a plus matchup for Miami. But if you with Jokic, the penalty for switching anything involving a guard is just like, well, I mean, now you're in the position of like, well, do you double him? Because that's bad too. Like you don't want to double him. And maybe that doesn't even matter because depending on the size of the guard, the Heat play small guys like Strus, Vincent, they're like combo guard sized kind of generously. You're just done. You can't switch. So you got to play like I guess you play some conventional drops and that leaves you open to Murray just hitting a bunch of threes or whoever, it's just the best things that he can do defensively just might not work. So I bump a little bit on the idea that it will be easier for Denver to defend Miami, because if we have any questions about Denver, it's still how good is the defense, because we just don't have questions.
Good enough is the answer.
Good enough.
Yeah.
But I do definitely I'm with you on the idea that like the Heat just don't have a ton of great options. If they want to be disruptive, it'll be very hard for them to make an offense look like they made Boston's offense look, because the Nuggets just have different types of players.
I have 2 rotation questions for either team for you. Let's start with the Nuggets. Is this a series where, and they might just not do it because look at Michael Malone doing what he's done, it's gotten them here. Could this be a series where we see more of the double stagger, where it's Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. without Jokic, or, and I'm going to say no, just because I just feel like we have evidence that suggests that's not going to happen. Could this be a series where they're going to lean, like one of the things I would have liked to have seen them try more to this point is kind of, we've seen them lean into like some pretty heavy bench defensive lineups, but like, could it be a situation where it's Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr., one of those, and then we're going to see more of Bruce Brown, KCP, Christian Brown, and Aaron Gordon around them, because they've been more willing to go Aaron Gordon, like as your de facto big. But like, do you see, is this a series where if you were going to push one of those buttons, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling through this. If you're going to push one of those buttons against the Heat, what are you more likely to push if you're Denver?
So my options are basically going small with Jokic off the floor. It's Gordon at center versus what's my alternative to that?
Or are we going to see double stack where it's you're going to lean into Murray? You could do some semblance of, okay, Aaron Gordon's at center with both Murray and Porter Jr., but I think, is it, let's lean all the way defense if we go smaller with Aaron Gordon at the 5? Like put Christian Brown in there, see him with KCP and Bruce Brown, and then you have Jamal Murray or Porter Jr. with Gordon? Or are you going to prioritize maybe during those non-Jokic minutes, like let's see more of the double stagger with both Murray and MPJ on the court?
I think I probably won't go the latter because I'm concerned about anything the Nuggets. If I'm the Nuggets, I'm concerned about scoring with Jokic off the floor. So I want to put the best possible offensive personnel out there that I can, because if you do take Jokic off the floor, then the Heat can switch. Right. Like, so I think you have to lean offense, I guess. Whatever that looks like. And I think the best way to do that is to have Murray and MPJ play together a lot. But if you do put Gordon at center, then the Heat are going to be the Heat can kind of get back into how they want to play. I think if that's so. Basically, newsflash: Jokic being off the floor makes it harder for Denver to be great.
My thing is, though, is this series where you could, I think I actually might lean into the Gordon, like, let's go with that defensive heavy lineup, because I'm assuming Bam's minutes are going to be mirrored by Jokic's.
They have to.
And so we've seen the Heat, they went basically bigless. Bam is a big, but they went basically centerless, true centerless in their final 2 games against Boston. Mm-hmm. And there's just like, during those minutes, especially if Bam's not on the court, there's nothing you could throw out there if I'm Denver that's going to phase me from wanting to roll with that smaller unit and seeing, okay, can it maybe generate enough offense for that to work? And even if you have to go, and this would lead into my other question, Miroslav should kind of beat me to it for the Heat. Miroslav says Love and Zeller will have to play double figure minutes combined. Is this a series where we saw them get away from it against Boston, but like, are Love and Zeller more important to the series, even if it's by virtue of like, we need those extra fouls in the front court because Jokic is going to draw?
Yeah. What's the theory of, I was just going to say, like, I don't know if it's a Kevin Love series. I guess if you lean all offense in the non-Jokic minutes and you want to preserve some spacing, or certainly if the Heat do play some zone, I think Love is a good guy to have out there for that. But just because you don't want him guarding in man-to-man if you can help it. I don't know.
Unless it's Steph Curry in Game 7 of the 2016 NBA
unless
Finals.
It's him. Yeah,
I'm sorry, it's a rough day for you. Bob Myers stepping down. Kirk Lacob and Mike Dunleavy Jr. basically just confirmed as his successors. And now I'm taking shots about the 2016. I apologize.
That's okay. When you talk about Kevin Love, you have to mention it because invariably you have to talk about the defensive questions, and then you can point to the 2016 when he shut down Curry. I in a weird way, I think Adebayo might be more important than Jimmy Butler for the Heat in this series, which is, again, a dumb thing to say, but it's just the options if you don't have Adebayo out there are so bad. You can't play that. You can't play really, like, Highsmith cannot play center. Again,
he's going to probably.
That's what I mean, because you're gonna like, what's Zeller giving you? Maybe it turns out that Zeller actually just can defend Jokic like as well as could be expected, which is, not well, but it's good enough, and he's the one that ends up playing a little more. But then the Heat have had a really short rotation for basically all these playoffs. And I think it might need to get shorter, which is a huge ask of a team that's had the path that they've had to this point. But because I don't like the thought of Love or Zeller out there. Unless Love runs hot or something, that gets scary for me.
But what about LT Hightower? He can sure play center. Well, we get a lot of Hightower jokes in the chat today. Shout out everybody. I think I'm with you there. So you ultimately think the Heat are going to skew smaller still? Is that where you would land?
Oh, I guess where I'd land is I don't like either option. I think they're going to have to try Love and or Zeller, at least early in the series, and they may just determine that this isn't going to work, and we just have to, not go beyond our starters, and maybe Hero gets back midway through the series. But I don't know how fair it is to expect much from him. If he helps, I don't know.
At this point, and also, so I put this up prematurely before, but Stefan Stojic says he needs to put small guards that will fall and flop on the court. That would be something else that they could try. I mean, they have Kyle Lowry, and we could
He's the
get maybe Kyle
best.
Lowry give Gabe Vincent some lessons there.
Mhm.
If Tyler Hero was available to come back, and I think I saw reports that he most likely wouldn't be, I probably wouldn't bring him back. This is just like what's been not special about this Heat's run. I don't want to say that they're by far and away better off without him. I think what's helped fuel their success is the absence or almost absence of these mega defensive weak points
Yeah.
in this series,
Yeah.
or by each series. And yes, there's Duncan Robinson, but like he hasn't been like absolutely terrible, and teams have not gone after him. From beginning with the Knicks, that they weren't like really targeting him, and then we didn't see that a ton from Boston either. I mean, they tried to put him in actions, and then like even Max Strus, I think, is a better defender than people give him credit for. And you look at his size, I think he's like, isn't he 6'7" or something or whatever? And so
He's
he's
listed.
hitting
He
enough.
doesn't look as tall, but he's listed as like a wing height.
And he becomes big for them too, because Duncan Robinson is clearly like the better movement shooter. And I think you probably trust Duncan Robinson off the dribble at this point more, right? Like,
I don't know. I mean, it's I think they do, to get to like your point about Hero, the Heat do a good job of syncing up a lot of their zone possessions to when Robinson's out there. And I think that's fine when there's like one, I think it's fair to call him a suspect defender. I don't know if he's been a bad defender necessarily in these playoffs, but him and Hero together, if you really need to skew offense, that's not gonna work.
And it doesn't matter where, like, you could even putting both of them in the zone, like that's not really going to help you.
No.
And there's just the other element of the zone too, is we didn't really talk about it, is like just having Bruce Brown's rim pressure that translates to both on and away from the ball. Like that can be a zone buster in itself. And so I just don't, and Miroslav Shuk asked this, we did mention this a little bit. Do you think that he could get away playing zone defense with Jokic on the court? My answer would be no. I think they could maybe get away with it more when he's off the court. But then what is are you going that route when he's off what would be the point that Jamal Murray's on a heater who's, by the way, Jamal Murray, you talk about someone who just flips the switch for the playoffs. Mm-hmm. He shot 37% on fadeaway jumpers in the regular season. He's shooting 47% on them in the regular season.
Shots. Caleb Martin-esque with his fadeaway. Did you see? I've the Caleb Martin story has been incredible, but when he hit like the pivoting turnaround jumper in the lane in Game 7, it was just like, there's no way the Celtics can win this game. It's over.
No, and he was so fantastic, and he's doing everything. He was defending Jason Tatum. He's getting to the basket away from the ball with his cutting. He's hitting these jumpers. He's doing everything.
I mean, not to just, we're going to pile on eventually, so we may as well start. Like, you cannot expect him to play better. Like, you just not, you can't, he cannot be better than this. I don't think. I mean, if he is, then we really need to do a deep dive on whatever Heat culture is. And I think it's fair to say that the Nuggets are harder to deal with than the Celtics because, it looks, at least from where we're sitting now, maybe this all changes after Game 1 and we're back here talking about, the Heat, they figured it out again. But it's, Boston, we knew their offense could get into gear grinding territory. And we knew that the turnover, all that stuff, the Nuggets have not shown any of that like exploitable frailty at all in these playoffs. So like, not only do the Heat need all these guys that have played over their heads to keep it up, they probably need them to improve to like on that level to realistically have
just average 20 points while shooting 50% from 3 and defending his butt off. They
not
need
enough.
him to be
need more.
Not enough.
Need more from you.
So from the Nuggets perspective defensively, how do you see, like, how are you handling their matchups? Because what I do think is interesting is, I guess you have a bunch of people that you could throw on Jimmy Butler in theory. And I think you might like the idea of putting Aaron Gordon on Bam, but if there's no Love or Zeller in the game, that does make it, I just feel like you can't go that route. I would rather just put Jokic on Bam, who, by the way, might be regressing on offense anyway. And so is that as big of a problem? Yeah. And if you're going to like the Heat, we've seen them spam a ton of pick and rolls in these playoffs. Like the way that the Nuggets have been defending with Nikola Jokic in the pick and roll, like I think it's just going to work against Miami, like because of what everyone else is doing. And then also I feel like the threat level of like Bam Adebayo on offense right now is just not going to be enough to exploit Jokic. And then like if he, the way to do it would be like, yes, if Bam is going to be involved in these actions, or even if he's going to be the primary ball handler and he's able to put the ball on the floor and navigate traffic and get around Jokic, like that's where you could maybe cause problems, get Jokic into foul trouble. Maybe I'm reading too much into like kind of the end of the Boston series. I just didn't see that for like right now. Like, Bam is not on one of those heaters.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Well, my first thought when you said, what do you think matchup wise is I think you want Gordon on Butler if you can make it work everywhere else. Cause I think Bruce Brown's a little too small. Because Derek White is probably a better defender than Bruce Brown, and for a lot of that series just wasn't strong enough. And I think White and Brown are comparably sized, so I don't want to get into that. You can't use Murray, you can't use MPJ. That just doesn't leave you a lot of other options. I do think KCP. As I'm talking, KCP, I think KCP might be too small too.
Look at who KCP's had to guard though.
I've long been in the KCP, put him on my team for if I'm trying to win a title, a fan club. I don't know. I think that's clearly, I don't know why I took so long to get to KCP, but he's clearly the second option after Gordon, right? If you could just pick a guy. I think Christian Brown might matter a lot, right? Because he's a little bigger, like he's out there to defend, and maybe he gets 5 minutes on Butler. Maybe he gets more. I don't know. I think, can you imagine, this is pivoting a little bit, but it's still related to Denver's defense. Can you see a scenario where, if we're looking for ways this works for the Heat, where Jokic comes up to the level of the screen, the Heat get off the ball, they kind of get the Nuggets into rotation on the backside, and they get their driving kick and they generate a lot of threes, and it just becomes a make or miss thing. Does that seem like the way it works for the Heat? If it's going to work, is they manage to exploit the Nuggets playing, if the Nuggets do this and don't vary their coverages, but get Jokic up to the level, and it looks almost like a trap or a hedge, and there's opportunities if you can get off the ball quick enough in that situation. Like that seems viable to me. But that presumes Denver will just play that exact same way against every pick and roll, which they won't.
And yeah, they have varied their coverage. And I think because if Bam is the big, like, is playing him and drop as damaging as it normally would be? I mean, you need to trust the other guy involved in the actions, either get around the screen or like going to be able to pick up the ball handler again. But there's also the kind of thing of, well, do you trust, like, you could, like, how my question would be like, how far down can Jokic drop when Bam is like the big, like, because Bam is not taking those shots. And so, yeah, if you're worried about the Heat kind of pulling up from mid range, you live with that though. And so I feel like even the Nuggets, I think they're at their best when they're bringing Jokic up to the level, but that's also the most difficult thing to successfully complete. But that's when they're at we see them be at their most disruptive at points. And that's when they look their best to me. It feels like, maybe Nuggets fans, analysts feel differently, but I'm just like, I hate shitting on the Heat because they're not in the NBA finals by accident. Yeah. But the Nuggets, the Heat are the Heat are a mediocre to good team that is playing great right now. The Nuggets are actually a great team.
Yeah.
And it just feels like even some of their weaknesses aren't as eminently exploitable by Miami as some of these other opponents were. And I think a lot of that's probably just also going to have to do with the Heat. They like to force turnovers and generate points that way. The Nuggets don't turn the ball over.
Right.
Like, they have their games, but like, is Miami really going to be able to disrupt them that much? And so if you're going to give the Nuggets an opportunity to get their defense set, that's more key than how are they defending the pick and roll to me. They have, it's like, if they're just going to be able to get their defense set, no, it's not. I'm not going to say it's curtains, but it's just like, I want to come up with a way other than, well, look at what the Heat have done for them to win the series. I'm struggling to find it.
I mean, I can, just thinking about it, I think your main point is correct. Like, we could talk about how the pick and roll coverages are going to work, or what are the options and what might stem from that. Like, one of those being, I think if you drop Jokic and you get the ball to Bam in space, you can run another cutter off him and do the Warriors Draymond Green handoff stuff, and you get jumpers that way. If Jokic is, being super conservative, we've already talked about, if you bring him up to the level, there might be some ways the Heat offense could eat. But yeah, that matters less than just overall the tactical stuff. We talked about this for the Lakers series with Denver too, where, the Lakers are a great transition team. That's one of their half court offense is no good. So a lot of their success will depend on, can we get out on the break? do you want to play an up-tempo game with a more rested Denver team if you're the Heat that's got a shorter rotation as it is? Like, you want to turn this into like a turnover fest where we're getting up and down? Because that's good luck. That's not the way it's going to work. And so it's kind of the thing where if you go slow against Denver, I think that plays into their hands because they can get set even if you're not on a made basket. And if you try to pick it up and make the game scattered or whatever, Denver's just better at that too. So I think, there are ways for the Heat to succeed game to game, but sort of even in the micro of how you're going to guard pet actions and the macro of like, how fast would you like to play this series? There's dangers in, every possible sense for Miami, small and large, what should we say? Like, oh, Denver's layoff has been too long. They're going to be rusty. Can we give them that?
I was actually going to, so Justin Russo had tweeted this during Game 7 saying someone's going to ask Nikola Jokic about that series, and he's absolutely going to say that he didn't watch. And so I find that he was probably just at some resort in parts unknown, lounging in a pool, riding horses. Maybe he arrives by chariot to his finals media availability. Sure. Do you buy into this idea that there can be such a thing as too long of a layoff for Denver?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it'll be what people say if they fall behind by 10 in the second quarter in game 1. But it's like, that's hard. I think at this point, any rest you can get is good. As much of it as you can get is good, right? Like, everybody's banged up.
Michael Porter Jr. had said, I think it was him, and I don't want to misquote him, but he had talked about once about how Jokic will come into training camp and he's just not in the best shape, but then by the end of it, he's just fine. This is not an off-season's layoff. This is like shorter than or as long as the All-Star break.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if anything, I would agree with you. I think the rest is more important. So I just can't, like, I don't know what the best argument is for the Heat other than, okay, well, if they're going to win this series, I think you mentioned it, like the driving and like the kicking, if they're going to get into the lane. And it sort of makes me wonder, like, are they going to have to, win the conference finals against Boston? They took, what were they at in 3-point attempts per game? They're not a team that like shot a ton. They were under 30.
No,
I think they're going to have to juice that number up quite a bit.
Yeah, they took 205 in the conference finals and Boston took 267. But of course, since the Heat shot it so much better, they actually made 8 more threes than the Celtics did, despite.
That's wild. And like, can you count on shooting 43+% from deep?
Yeah,
again.
Right. Yeah. I look like, so Heat in 4, because we can't bet against the Heat. They're inconquerable. But yeah, no, there are ways for this to work for Miami. It's just, if Denver makes the one adjustment, then after that, I don't know what Miami's sort of counters can be. Because in a lot of, these playoff series, the deeper you get, it's always like, okay, so this worked. So how will they counter that? And then how will they counter the counter? And then, by like game 5 or 6, it's kind of just, we all know what we're doing. I don't know that Miami has as many different ways to go that seem like, high value options. But I do think Miami's going to be the team that's adjusting. Denver, I think, can show up and kind of just do what it wants to do. And if that works, great. If it doesn't, then they'll deal with it. But they're not the team coming in having to figure stuff out, I don't think.
Predictions. Who you got in this series?
I think it's going to be Denver in.
I know what you want to say.
I kind of want to say 5. But I think I'm going to say, and this is stupid, but I'm going to go 6 and have Denver win it on the road. Denver in 6.
I'm going to say Denver in 5. I think maybe Caleb Martin deserves me picking Denver in 6. I'm going to say Denver in 5. I think and Rob had pointed this out in his last, like Jimmy Butler, I think he was great in the final game, but like he's banged up. This team is coming off a grueling series. The Nuggets have more rest. We've seen them they're not a team, and maybe it changes, but like they didn't take their foot off the gas against them. They went for the throat, for the jugular. Yeah. And I think if they're able to come out and there's a chance they might blow the doors off the Heat in game 1 for just a variety of factors. And I think the pathway to the Heat extending this series, or maybe even winning it, is just, are they going to continue to be otherworldly on offense and force the Nuggets to make different decisions defensively in the half court? And I just don't know that they have the personnel I won't even say available, but on the roster in general
Right.
to do that to such an extent. And so beyond that, you're then hoping, okay, well, do we get some colder shooting or colder performances from Denver supporting cast? And it's just like the amount of weapons they have, like they're not going to play Bruce Brown or Jeff Green if they're hurting them on offense. Although Stefan Stojic said the Heat can be a plus 25 in 10 minutes of Jeff Green. And so maybe that's how they win. But
yeah,
I just like Murray has had his peaks and valleys. And even Michael Porter Jr. has had his peaks and valleys. And yet Michael Porter Jr. is consistently showing up on the defensive end as well. The Nuggets feel steadier. The top of their rotation is just, I think the Heat are probably more likely to plumb the depths of their rotation at this point than Denver. And that's just a fact at this point. But like when you look at the top 6-7 guys in Denver's rotation, depending on how you feel about Jeff Green or Christian Brown, they're so bankable in a way that I still feel like Miami's is still searching for, all right, it's been Jimmy Butler and it's been Caleb Martin, and then who is it? Yeah. And I don't think the Nuggets are consistently asking that question.
No, I think there's a good chance you get a Jimmy Butler game where the Heat win because Jimmy Butler is the best player on the floor, even with Jokic out there. I think you probably get one. If you get two of those, then we're talking, then it's interesting, because then all you need is the Heat make 12 of 21 3-point attempts or something ridiculous like that. And maybe, that's a way they get a win. But yeah, like I think the other paths for the Heat extending the series to 7 or winning it is like Adebayo is going to have to be a big time scorer, I think. And if not that, he's going to have to be setting up a ton of good looks for everyone else, just depending on how the Nuggets choose to guard him.
And he can like his screens are deadly. And like
he's a great player. He's on the short list of centers I think you want to make a deep playoff run. Like the Heat have made many deep playoff runs with him as a center. He's just not comfortable. It's so out of character for him to be a guy that needs to get you 30. Like that's not what he does. But he may need to really score a lot.
Martin does.
Caleb Martin handles that. But yeah, it feels like the more I talk about it, the more we go back and forth. It feels like Adebayo is going to have to. There can't be any questions about, is Adebayo like a great player? Because if there are, then that means he wasn't, and the Heat just haven't cracked the Nuggets defense. That's how I'm looking at it right now.
If any Heat fans made it to the end of this, which I feel like maybe they didn't because it came off, we did at the beginning. We tried to show respect to the Heat. If you're just going to dismiss all this and point to, well, we're the 8th seed or the 7th best record is how I'm going to say it. Look where we are. I don't have an argument for you. Like talk your shit. But I have Nuggets in 5. I don't want to be the coward's pick, and the Heat have shocked us at every turn. Let's see if they do it again. Is all I could really say.
Yeah.
Did you want to spend a couple minutes on these recent coaching hires?
Sure. Yeah. Where do you want to start?
Let's go with Adrian Griffin to the Bucks. Thoughts on that? We had discussed it a little bit before it happened when we were asked like what we thought about it, but any thoughts about the decision that they made, them kind of defaulting, it seems like, to what Giannis wanted? Would you have gone a different direction, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, part of the analysis is easy because he's never been a head coach, and therefore we don't really know anything about what he's going to do as a head coach. So he's kind of a mystery bag there. I was surprised because I think when I'd been asked about it before, there's all these coaching vacancies. Which job would you take if you were just Coach X? And I kind of defaulted to like, well, wherever Giannis is, I think I want to go coach there. So you would think that the Bucks had the ability to get Nurse or whoever they wanted, whether Monty Williams or whatever. And the fact that they hired an assistant makes me think like, was it money? Did they not want to spend because they've got all this, roster expenses that are going to skyrocket with Chris Middleton probably declining his player option and Brook Lopez, unrestricted free agent. Got a lot of money to spend there. You're a tax team. You may be a second apron team if you're not careful. Probably will be a second apron team. So was that it, or was it as simple as Giannis said, I like this guy, you should hire him, and they said, yes, sir, we will do that?
Well, at this point, you absolutely do.
100%. Yeah. Like, no, if they want him to hire AJ Griffin as the head coach, say, absolutely. Well, can we have Adrian like as the first seat on the bench? Mr. Antetokounmpo, is that? I think you do what he says, but like it feels weird that they didn't get the blue chip headline candidate a little bit. but maybe Griffin has been mentioned as like a guy that's going to get the next job for years, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's just he's the right guy. They wanted a fresh start. They didn't want to retread. I don't know.
Mark Stein had pointed this out in his newsletter, that it's now become very clear that when the Suns, the Bucks, and even the Raptors, because it was Nurse, made their decisions, it was all framed as they know who they want in that position after that. And Mark Stein basically framed it as it's clear now that no, they didn't. That the decision was not settled based off the decisions that have been made or not made. As we're the Suns by the way, and the finalists for the Suns job as we're speaking is Kevin Young, their own assistant, Doc Rivers, and Frank Vogel are the reported names. That is, look, I don't know enough about Kevin Young, but if like your big move after getting rid of Monty Williams is hiring Frank Vogel or Doc Rivers, I have questions. That's all I'm going to say. I have questions.
The Doc Rivers angle is the hardest for me to understand. Especially like you're going to have, if Chris Paul is going to be on that team, like we're doing that again. I mean, maybe he's not, that's far from a given. But yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about Nurse? How does that hiring strike you?
Nick Nurse to the Sixers, I thought was interesting because Shams had reported, I think it was Shams, that he pulled out of the Milwaukee gig. Yeah. And I tweeted that I found it interesting he would pull out of the Milwaukee gig. Like, is the Sixers job more preferable then? Some people said that it was Shams doing Nurse a favor. And it's just like, look, you can.
Nurse is a clutch client, by the way.
What's that?
Nurse is a clutch client, by the way.
That would make sense. But it's like, we got to stop like just assuming all those things, but the timeline is not clear. So I think that's fair. I don't really know what benefit it is by saying Nick Nurse pulled out of a job that he wasn't being considered for, if that's like how he was actually framing it. I like the hire because they went with someone in Doc Rivers, who every coach is a tactician to some extent, as much as fans and we like to, you and I like to pretend that we know about the game. Yeah. But they went with the kind of functional psycho at this point. And that's, we tried the Doc Rivers thing. Let's go that route. I will say, rest in peace to Joel Embiid's cartilage or something, because like, is this
he's going to play him a lot?
The amount that he had to, and you could argue it was the Raptors' depth as an issue, but he really ran his top players in Toronto aground the past 2 seasons, whether that's a function of the roster or not. And now you're dealing with, okay, if James Harden sticks around, he's getting older, and you have Joel Embiid, who's just, he played a ton this year, but he was banged up for the postseason as always, and he's had his injury concerns in the past. I find that as an interesting decision. I'm sure it's easier to get Nurse to conform to any sort of playing time caps or load management strategies that you want to implement, and that you're just hoping he's going to have an inventive, functional impact on the way that your team is running. So I thought it was a good hire. I don't know. Do you think it can infer anything about James Harden's free agency or the direction of that team? Or is it just, he was probably one of the top 3 guys available? Like, even to start the summer, we know Ime Udoka, how many teams ostensibly wanted him, although it doesn't seem like the Raptors gave him much, whatever. But even at the start of all this, he was considered one of the top 3 names available. And so it's just, hey, we got him. Like, that's what you want to do.
I think you're in my head a little bit, because I was just thinking, which Harden possibility does Nick Nurse taking this job seem more likely? Because if you're presumably, I mean, maybe the Sixers just don't have an answer. Like, maybe they could not have told Nurse he will be back or he will not, or this is what we're going to offer. We think it has this likelihood of him accepting. But if I'm Nurse, I don't really, and coaches are all this way. I think you just want as much talent on the roster tomorrow as you can possibly have. And so like if I'm Nurse, I don't care about, well, this is what it's going to, these are the resources we have to replace James. We could get into our mid-level. We could use that. We could, we could figure up something out, and we'll set ourselves up financially much better over the next like 5 to 7 year win. Like, Nurse is going to be like, I don't care. Can I have the best players on the roster, please? I don't care what it costs. That's not
like, you're not giving me an 8-year contract to see out.
Yeah, no, right. I'll take the next year, 2, 3, based on how coaching is going now. And so I would posit that Nurse taking this job, assuming he had as many options as anybody else on the market, maybe more, seems like it's more likely that Harden will be back. If that was something the Sixers could even communicate to him with any certainty, just because this is a worse job if you don't have another all-star on the roster besides Embiid. Maybe Maxey gets there, but I think if I'm Nurse, I want, as crazy as it is for us, because we evaluate Harden and say he does this, he doesn't do this. We the playoff failures, all this other stuff. But like, if you're just a coach, I think you want the most talent you can have. And you don't care what it costs or what the value of it is, dollar for dollar production. That doesn't matter. You just want Harden. So maybe that means he's more likely to stay. And the Houston thing was, I think Windhorst said like feels a little leveragey, the Houston stuff. So maybe that's all it is. That's what I'd do if I were Harden.
Yeah, I mean, you want to make leverage, but if as Chris Haynes reported from Bleacher Report that Harden wants to be on a competitive team, there's stuff the Rockets could do aside from getting James Harden. Like that's not the team that's going to contend.
No,
immediately. No. I want to ask you this because I thought at first it was one person that said it to me, and then it was a whole bunch of people seem to be of the mind that the Sixers have a brighter future than the Bucks. And the argument being that they, even if things go wrong, if James Harden leaves, they're going to be able to be more flexible, and they have Tyrese Maxey. And so which situation, Milwaukee or Philadelphia, are you higher on, factoring in everything, best case scenario and worst case scenario over the next 4 to 5 years?
Yeah, it's a closer question than you would think. But I'm receptive to the like low end potential outcomes in Milwaukee because they just got bounced in the first round. 1, 2, you have the Lopez Middleton stuff to think about, and like the long trajectory of the Bucks who are out a bunch of draft picks and all this other stuff is not great. So I still go Milwaukee because I just think even though Embiid won MVP and was better than Giannis this past season, I've seen a Giannis team win a championship. I think I still just don't have any questions about like as a tone setter in terms of work ethic and unselfishness and all this other stuff and availability. Like Giannis is still just that guy. So I'd hitch my wagon there. But it's closer than you think, even with, the Sixers potentially losing Harden for nothing and Embiid's injuries and stuff. I understand why someone would ask that question, but I think Milwaukee, just because of Giannis being there, has a brighter future.
That's the deciding factor for me too, is Giannis being there. But I guess I don't have it as close as you do, because it's not like I guess the Bucks lack that blue chip young player in Tyrese Maxey, but it's not like the Sixers have a much better draft pick situation than Milwaukee. And then Giannis though is okay. Embiid has played 2,200 plus minutes the past 2 seasons. Is that like something we can count on for him to do every single year? And just like with those injury concerns and Rob had said so in the chat, can Embiid stay healthy? That's absolutely the biggest questions. And look at this. Shout out G Hughes. I'm a fan of their sugar-free condiments. I don't know if you've ever seen the G Hughes condiments.
No, that's a thing.
Go look it up. Their steak sauce, I mean, it's very expensive, but if you care about your macros, it's delightful. But shout out Grant Hughes. We don't shout out Grant Hughes enough. We love us Grant Hughes around here. The gap between Giannis and Embiid, if you want to say from a talent perspective, is actually not that large. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine. But the trust that I have that Giannis is going to be more available in the forthcoming years, immediately you could talk about how worried you are about the end of his athletic prime. Are you not going to worry about Embiid getting older too? And so it's the Bucks for me pretty clearly.
Yeah, I'm with you. Is Monty Williams going to coach this year?
He has 3 years and $20 million, I think, owed to him from Phoenix. Are you coaching if you're like, is that
I'm not doing anything ever again if I have 3 years and 20 million. I forget coaching. I'm sitting right. I'm not sorry, Dan. I'm also not talking to you. Well, I'd probably talk to you, but I wouldn't I wouldn't need it to pay me.
I don't think he is at this point because like the jobs are drying up. One of the openings is the one that he got fired from. So he's not going.
You don't think they'll have him back?
No, and so it's Toronto now or bust at this point. What else are we forgetting?
Did Detroit hire somebody?
Oh no, Detroit didn't. But there's actually the reporting has been from Stein that they've been trying to get Monty
Oh,
Williams.
right. That's right. We talked about that. Yeah. He would be a good person for that job, but because he's got 20 million, he doesn't have to take a rebuild. So,
Right. And so I'm going to say no. What do you think?
probably no. Because Detroit will go young, and then I don't know what Toronto's going to do. Is Budenholzer going to go to Toronto? Is that what's going to happen?
So we had this question. I had to answer it on my own. Do you view their expansive coaching search as a sign that they're being thorough, or that they're kind of spinning their wheels and have no idea what the fuck is going on?
More the second one, because well, you said, it's always assumed or often assumed that when a team fires a coach, they know who they want. I think in Toronto specifically, they just realized they did not want Nick Nurse anymore, and maybe he didn't want to be there either. So it wasn't so much like, oh, there's this guy out here, we gotta go get him. So yeah, I mean, like the Nash interview was wild, and Redick was tied to them too, right? Like, or at least had interviewed, or
right. And it's like, do you view them as serious? I guess at this point,
no, that's the thing. Like, I don't understand. Like, Nash, I guess, did the job, but like, what a weird set of circumstances. And we talked about line jumping and what do we know about him as a coach? Like, all that applies to Redick, except Redick hasn't coached at all yet. Like, that's the Nat.
We haven't even heard about him working with players.
Yeah,
like Steve Nash was. So.
Yeah. No, that would be quite a leap. So yeah, maybe they're really smoke screening this exceptionally well, and they just know who. I don't know.
But who's the hire they're pulling out of their pocket? Because Nick Nurse off the board, that was considered one of the top gets. Ime Udoka, who they were linked to and was considered one of the top gets, off the board. Not only off the board, chose Houston. And have they even been linked? They have not been linked heavily, at least, to Monty Williams. It's been, and you go through the names of their coaching search, they've been linked to like all the assistants, you name them. Like they were there.
Yeah.
I think Adrian Griffin interviewed for that job as well. What does it say about that, by the way? So I guess maybe they didn't want him, or was the process taking too long that he didn't wait out that to see what happens there? So I'm just like, at this point, I said it last week. I was like, well, I don't really view it as something bad that it's taken this long and they're having such a wide coaching search. But as the jobs start to dry up and the names start to dry up,
yeah,
I'm kind of like, oh, all right. Well, I'm less convinced at that.
Yeah, there doesn't feel like, I'm imagining the Woj tweet of like whoever they hire. There isn't a name out there right now where I'd say like, oh, okay, all right, now I get it. That's the guy they want.
What would even be like the most Raptors hire at this point?
I don't even know what they want. I mean, they're low key like one of the most influx teams in the league with, both of their starting guards have player options and they got to re-sign Pirtle. And what kind of team do you want to be with all these forward? Like, I mean, maybe that's part of the coaching issue is like, it's probably pretty hard for them to say what this team is going to look like next year and how it's going to play. So yeah, I don't know. I have no names for you for the Raptors.
Adelman, Rob Shelton says.
Rick?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the one that, we'll throw George Karl in there at some point. Or they have not been linked to Doc Rivers, right? As far as I know, I don't think I
haven't seen that. No.
Do you have anything else to add, or do you want to take us out of here?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Actually, I'm not happy to because I treasure our talks, but I will do it anyway. As Dan said at the top, everyone, thank you for listening / watching / chiming in the chat. If you would like to be advised timely of any time we're going to do one of these, follow us on our socials at HardwoodKnocks on Twitter and TikTok, at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram. Join our Discord. Dan assures me that the link that will lead you there is functional. Once again, cannot speak to that because I don't do the internet.
Don't do the internet.
I don't know how. I don't know what it is. It's very confusing and scary to me. But yeah, follow us everywhere, rate, review, subscribe, tell friends and enemies. Join us on these next time these live streams next time if you would like to get a question in. We appreciate all of them. And as usual, we close with a shout out to the one and only Frank Ntilikina, and I will apologize to Jared Allen today.